This is an extract from the Leader Coronavirus Daily podcast by the Evening Standard and hosted by me, David Marsland. To hear the whole thing, search for it on your podcast provider. When the pubs and restaurants of Paris were told to close at 10 p.m. as part of lockdown restrictions, there was uproar and change. Pubs still have to close early, but restaurants get extra time. With the same argument happening in the UK, our editorial column thinks the government here should have a look at what's going on across the channel.
We report today that Paris changed the rules this week so that restaurants can trade later as long as their customers are eating. It deemed restaurants to be less of a risk. In London, one study suggests that allowing our restaurants to stay open later could be worth nearly $1 billion in extra revenue, and Public Health England figures show infections coming from restaurants that comply with the guidelines are minimal. The 10 p.m. curfew here followed Paris. However, that city had the sense to change it.
The Evening Standard's Jonathan Prynn is with me. Jonathan, why is France letting restaurants open later but not pubs?
Well, the French authorities have taken the view that there's a difference between a group of people sitting down, eating a meal in a restaurant at socially distanced tables, and a group of people basically drinking in a bar, not having a meal, not having anything to eat, in a much less controllable environment. So they've taken the view that whereas bars must shut at 10 o'clock, and also they've stopped shops serving alcohol after 10 o'clock as well. But restaurants can keep going to their normal closing time.
So it's much more civilised in a restaurant then, Jonathan?
Well, you know, it's a very French view, isn't it? One of the restaurateurs explained to me today, in France, restaurants will be the last thing to be closed down. In Britain, it's the first thing to be closed down, or least restricted. And you know, eating out is an absolutely fundamental part of the French way of life. So for now, at least, restaurants can carry on serving through to 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, however long their license is. Whereas in London, everyone is out the door by 10, which effectively means last orders at 8:30 and bills being presented at 9:30, which is proving really, really difficult to manage.
Could something like that work here? Do people want it to work here?
Well, the restaurant sector are desperate for it here because 10 o'clock closing is killing them. The main point being that they can't turn the tables, they can't get 2 sittings in. If you're offering a long tasting menu, that can mean that your last sitting is at 7 o'clock or 7:30. I've even heard of one restaurant which is not accepting bookings any later than 6:30 for a 10-course tasting menu. And okay, that's not for everyone, but you know, these are important businesses that employ many people, pay tax, and all add to the reputation of London as a gastronomic centre. So there is a lot of enthusiasm for something similar, a distinction. Not everyone. I mean, some people are telling me it seems unfair to discriminate between well-run restaurants and well-run bars, of which there are many. And of course, everyone has to be seated when ordering now anyway. So maybe they are just as safe, pubs and bars. But I think there's just a feeling that restaurants have invested vast amounts of money into making their premises COVID secure. People are sitting down. They're not, generally, I think an environment where you're sitting down with a meal and talking to friends is likely to be more controllable than a group of people just drinking. That feels sort of intuitively right, but a lot of bar operators are saying, no, we're just as responsible as any restaurateurs.
Jonathan Prynn there, and you can read more of his reporting on Paris at standard.co.uk. But of course, all of this will be for nothing if no one goes into the centre of London. Public transport is essential to that, and it's in trouble. A report by TfL's finance boss says the outlook for the year is uncertain, partly because of the 10 p.m. curfew. The Mayor's asking the government for more than £3.5 billion to keep services running until the end of the 2022 financial year. Businesses want an even longer-term deal. With me is Ros Morgan from the Heart of London Business Alliance. Ros, how important is public transport to this city?
We knew how important the transport infrastructure was before, but I think that the crisis really has brought absolute focus and attention on the critical role that it plays. You know, in the West End, we employ 500,000 people and 95% of them travel in using public transport. We've got 200 million visitors traveling in each and every year. They too use public transport. So without the public transport, the question lies, how do these huge numbers of individuals access the West End? So, you know, in short, it's critical.
And does that kind of constant concern over the TfL budget, the 12-month solutions or a 24-month solution, does that add to uncertainty for businesses who want a bit of stability? They want to know what's going on and how they can get staff and customers to their premises.
It does. And, you know, some argue exactly that point, and has the crisis just offered maybe some kind of excuse? But ultimately, the business community isn't concerned with that or the politics around it. And instead, what they want to see is the correct investment, not because politically it's the right thing to do, but economically it's the right thing to do. You know, public transport plays a big part of everybody's life, and I just don't think that we should be playing politics with it.
So you're calling for a 5-year settlement now, Ros, and that's quite a commitment in some turbulent times. Why does it need to be that long?
So I think what we'd like to see, you know, it's very challenging times, but what we do need is levels of certainty, and some of this key infrastructure, you know, it's essential to the success of a business. If we could have the certainty that at least the travel infrastructure, that people will be able to get in, get out of the West End, of central London, that will give businesses the certainty that they need to plan around it. You know, we've got businesses, obviously, who have now put and invested huge sums of money in making their offices or their outlets COVID safe. And all of that amounts to absolutely zero if people can't actually get into the centre to use those facilities.
Search for the Leader Coronavirus Daily on any podcast provider to hear more from the podcast.